Hello everyone, and today we're going to be covering a chess game that was played between my brother, who will be co-hosting this vodcast, and a chess engine called Maya. Now, the purpose of Maya isn't necessarily to play the best moves possible, but to play the most human moves. So she will study a bunch of games that have been played by players of a similar rating, and she will determine what's the most likely move that a player of that rating will play. Similar to how your phone will predict what you might say in a text or what YouTube might determine that you will want to watch next. Maya does a similar thing, except over the board in chess. Now, this is a game between Danny and Maya, so we're going to cover it and see why Maya is playing the move that she's playing. This is an 1800 rated Maya bot on Lichess, which is a fairly intermediate rating. So we're going to go right ahead and go into the first move. So, Danny, my brother, who is co-hosting with the white pieces, opens with e4, and Maya responds with e6, known as the French defense, which is a fairly common defense. Danny responds with d4, occupying the center of the board, or at least trying to, and Maya responds with standard theory, just d5. And this could go a few different ways. We could go into the exchange variation with the white pawn capturing and then the pawn captures back. But what is more commonly recommended in this position is the advanced variation, which is e5. So e5 is played, followed by c5, followed by c3. And now you can see the setup here. White has a big chain of pawns occupying a big diagonal in the board. And black responds to this with knight to c6, followed by knight to f3, and this is followed by queen to b6. And as you can see here, this is fairly standard for a chess bot of this rating. The reason being this is a good amount of theory learned over the board about this defense, the French defense, and this is a level of theory that a player of this rating might know. So they've memorized a lot of the lines in a lot of the different variations of this defense. So moving on, a3, bishop to d7. So black wants to develop the pieces whilst getting ready to castle. Castling is where you bring the king to so it's no longer in the center of the board whilst developing your rook.
It's also worth mentioning that the reason this bishop move was played is because if he was to play something else like this, for example, and we move the bishop here, you might believe you're winning a pawn. So if we just turn the engine off, you take this pawn, take back, and it looks like this pawn's attacked twice and defended just once because the queen's blocked. But if black were to take, this would be immediately losing for black because of one really devastating check, which black would respond with bishop d7, and you have so many options here, all of them winning. I like to take here with check, king takes, and you win the queen.
And also black can't castle here either, which is minor when you compare it to the fact that black no longer has a queen, but it is also just an added disadvantage.
So this didn't happen.
No, this didn't happen. But the difference between Maya and Stockfish, because you turned off the Stockfish engine there to play the moves out, what Maya's doing is attempting to play the most human moves based on the rating that she's been programmed to play as. But Stockfish just plays what is considered to be the best possible moves, and it will be able to tell you objectively if a move is good or not and determine what could be the best move in that position. But moving on, Maya played knight to e7, and captures is the best possible move recommended by the engine, which is what Danny plays here. And the queen captures back. b4 is the next move played, and followed by queen to b6. Now this next move, Stockfish has labelled as a mistake. That yellow question mark or is what's called a mistake. So this is, all it means is that there were some better moves to play, and now black has a slight edge, which the engine will say. Minus 0.8 will say that black is winning this slightly.
The reason why this is considered winning for black is because black now has a development tempo whereby he can improve the position of one of his pieces whilst at the same time attacking one of mine. So this is the move that the engine played, I believe. And I have to respond to this or I will lose my bishop, so I just move back.
Yep. And because black has a tempo as well, all of a sudden, even though you have the white pieces and you've made the first move, you're defending, which is why it's not considered a great move. This move that black played bishop to e7 is called an inaccuracy. So all that really means is that it was there were better moves to be played. It's not as bad as a mistake, but there were better moves out there. But Maya has determined that somebody of the rating 1800 is likely to play a move like this. Because
the reason that Maya has played this move is because players of this rating range will want to castle to safety immediately, and this is one way to do so in one move. But Stockfish is considering the attacking opportunities. H5 is a very strong threat because it follows into H4, which causes considerable problems for White. Now, White would have to respond to this threat by playing H4 himself. So this was not played, and also this isn't very realistic for a human being because it weakens the king side where you're about to castle into. So you won't see this very much at this rating range.
No. So following on, we have castles and castles. Both players are trying to get their kings to safety whilst developing their rooks. And H4 was played, which is another mistake. The game has gone from White having a slight advantage to it now being basically dead even. But yep, so this is considered a blunder now. So the two question marks with the red colouring over them is a blunder. Danny, would you like to go ahead and explain exactly why this is such a bad move?
Right, so the problem here isn't the rook move necessarily. The problem is the opportunity missed on this side of the board. This is considered a better alternative because White really is forced to claim back some space capturing en passant. If you don't do this, you know, Black gets too much of a spatial advantage on the king side, so you have to take en passant. What this does is it activates the bishop and it opens up the file for the rook. So this gives Black all the compensation he needs to exchange this pawn. So instead of this, Black played rook c8, which is just considered too passive, not really activating anything in particular in the present moment. That's why the engine doesn't like it.
But also you can understand why Maya believes that somebody of this rating might go on to play such a move, because maybe they wouldn't be able to find the attacks over the board here.
So the reason Maya probably played this is because a human being would recognize that this is a semi-open file. Once the knight moves out of the way, the rook is bearing down on quite a few squares right here. And that's probably the only logic that it followed in playing this move.
So, yep, h5 was played just to attack the knight. And now, as a result of the rook move, just because of the passive nature behind it, really, it allowed White to get an attack on the knight. And now the knight is just completely undeveloped. Which is why Stockfish is giving White an advantage of plus 1.5, which isn't devastating. It's recoverable, but definitely not good. But now you've blundered here, so if you'd like to care to explain why this is considered a blunder?
Yeah, so this is one of those times when Stockfish will say something's a blunder, and it won't be immediately clear why exactly it is. The only reason I can theorize that this might be a blunder is because my knight's pretty good here. It's near the king side, it's a good piece, and doing this, from what I'm seeing here, trades off the good knight, and opens up this file that the rook put itself on. So really you're helping Black out here, which is something I didn't consider in the game. And it gives Black too many chances to get rid of this strong pawn. So the reason this is considered a blunder is because it's too passive.
Yep. And so yeah, I mean, you could also say that you're giving up a tempo which you had just to trade off pieces, which isn't.
Yeah, it's kind of lazy. You know, there's stronger things you could have done.
Yeah. So Black plays bishop to b5, which is again considered a mistake. But now from here the game is almost dead even. From this knight development, it goes from so it's basically a dead even mid game at this point. Trading off queens, rapid development of the rook, and this is another inaccuracy. And as you can see, Black is now slightly winning in this position until he made a blunder.
It's important not to dwell on +1, -1, because while this is accurate if you're playing against Stockfish, when you're playing against a human or a bot that behaves like a human, it's not going to make the perfect moves that translates that into a win, and it will often blunder its advantage with seemingly innocuous moves like this rook move, which obviously what it was intending to do here is go for the pawn. It's completely natural. Many human players would do it, but it just leaves this strong pawn here, which Stockfish recognizes as a massive threat.
Yep. So rook defending, and as you can see, Stockfish is saying that almost all of these moves in the sequence are considered inaccuracies, but from a human perspective, they look completely natural, and it doesn't seem like something a human would spot as being a bad move or spotting a better move. That king move earlier on was a blunder though, because now the c file is, well, white can have complete control over the c file, right?
Well, it can. If black does this, which is the only way to keep control over the c file, he loses a pawn. And while this is considered the best thing for the engine to do, because it thwarts any attacking chances by white, you do lose a pawn, and players will very rarely give up a pawn if it looks like it's not got any immediate advantage. You know, human players count. They count their advantage based on pawns and pieces, so either they're +1, -1, this helps them understand how good they are in the game. Doing this positionally is superior. Human beings don't see it that way, okay? So they would very rarely play this, which is why he didn't. He defended the pawn. And I took control over the c-file myself.
And as you can see at this point, Stockfish, the engine which will say objectively who's winning or losing, has it at nearly +5, which is considered quite a devastating advantage. So already from a move that looks completely natural from a human perspective, and indeed from the perspective of Maia, who's playing like a human, or at least trying to, it's actually devastatingly losing from the opinion of an engine who will say the objective facts. So Danny checks the king with rook to c7 and just defending, well, or at least moving out of the way of the check. And now you can see, playing it out for a few moves, you've just lost the knight in exchange for a pawn. So material-wise, Danny's up. Positional-wise, he's got more development. He could even potentially push some of his pawns and promote them to queens. So as the game is going on, the engine's just increasing the advantage for white. And I think a lot of humans in this position would be resigning right about now, but Maia is not programmed to resign. She literally can't. So these are all relatively natural moves just to play out. I think your idea was just to push this path pawn, I imagine.
Yeah, we're just looking to promote.
Yeah, and then it just becomes an easy endgame. If you've got way more material, it's easy to just gobble up all the material that the opponent has, and then you can just do some simple checkmates. Yep, so the best thing you can do is exchange the rook for a pawn. Even though the rook is worth 5 and the pawn is worth 1, the alternative was to let you queen, and then you have a queen.
Well, to be honest, the recommended move, according to Stockfish, was to go back and allow you to do this up here. The reason why Stockfish prefers this is because my king is further out of the game. And according to Stockfish, you want the enemy king to be as disabled and disactivated as possible.
But Maia just didn't see it that deep.
Maia didn't see it that deep. She just wanted to take the pawn. Now, the difference being the exact same position is on the board, except my king is closer to the action by 1 square. This is very considerable to Stockfish. To a human being, not so much.
Yeah, but at this point, it's just pretty much... I mean, Maia's trying to promote a queen there, but it's easily defended, giving up your bishop in exchange for the pawn, which is normally not okay, but in this position it's fine because you're getting a queen of your own, getting a second queen at this point even. And now it's just 2 queens and a rook against a pawn, which was nearly passed, but in the end, rook to b6 is checkmate, and that is the game. So yeah, that's the game, and you can understand going through it why it would seem as though a move seems completely natural and to a human not such a bad move, but when you do the second opinion of Stockfish, who tells you objectively who's winning and who's losing, that natural move is a horrific blunder, and you can see that just from one move it can go from almost dead even to devastatingly losing, which is something that a lot of human players won't see.
Yeah, this is the advantage of using an engine afterwards to review your game. So, for example, we have an analytic report here which details the exact sequence of events numerically, so you know who is winning and how much at the position. We can see here that Maya made 3 blunders compared to my 1 blunder, made 9 inaccuracies according to the engine compared to my 6, and made a singular mistake. Now, go on.
Oh no, I was just saying the interesting thing is though as well, if you were to go on a game online and just use moves recommended by the engine, even though it appears to be a human making these moves, the game is able to detect that something's been added into your play, that it's not just a human naturally making these moves. And it will ban you for it because you're getting help from a computer. And it's just interesting that it's able to spot that. And even in competitions over the board, there have been players that have used engines in secret, and then people have gone over the games and realised, even though it's a human making these moves, something's been added.
So the reason that the engine can determine whether you're cheating or not is because it calculates with depth. So it's not looking just one move into the future. I can play this move, and it's now looking potentially 53 moves deep, okay? So it knows potentially everything that can happen as a result of any particular move that I might make. Which is why if I played a stupid move like this, the engine immediately goes lower because it knows that it's a bad move. But it analyzes to avoid you playing such bad moves, and it knows that a sound move like this is the best approach. The engine's able to do this because it can basically read multiple lines at once. So whereas a human might only be able to calculate maybe 2 or 3 moves in the future, the engine can calculate endlessly, potentially to all the way to the end game. Humans can never compete in this department. This is why engines will always be stronger than humans, which is what also makes Maya so fascinating, because she has this at her disposal, but she's not using it in the same way that other engines do.
Yeah. And, well, yeah, that was the game. And I think it does show that a player like Maya, who's, even though it is an engine, when she's designed to play like a human, she'll make these natural blunders, which over the board don't seem as bad as they actually are until played out by an engine that objectively knows the right and wrong move. If you put Maya up against Stockfish, Stockfish will win 100% of the time, because Stockfish is playing the best possible moves and Maya isn't. So, it's all very interesting stuff, and I hope you enjoyed, and thank you very much for co-hosting, Danny.
Of course, thank you for having me.